many of you know what MCP stands for? Can someone just shout it out? Just yell it at me? Model Context Protocol, absolutely, that's right. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about MCP, and specifically about auth for MCP, which is kind of one of the hardest parts around it. So first takeaway, just getting right off the bat, I believe that MCP is going to become the primary interface for AI integration. So what do I mean by this? I mean how LLMs connect to your apps. I also mean how agents actually interact with the world, how they talk with each other, and specifically also how ChatGPT applications will work. It actually is already based on MCP. So if you haven't built anything with MCP yet, it's probably time to start learning. In the AI world, I think MCP was announced November 25th of last year, which is about 100 years in AI timescale at this rate. So if you haven't built anything with MCP, you definitely need to get started. This is going to be a quick introduction to how authentication specifically works in MCP, and if we have time at the end, a little quick demo. Cool. So MCP will be the primary interface for AI integration. If you're not familiar with it, MCP is kind of like a CLI, but it's a bit different. So here's an example at the top of how you might interact with GitHub through their command line tool. So gh alias setbugs, you can actually run that command. Under the hood, this is actually doing Git operations or working with their API. Down below, this is what it looks like for MCP. So this is what it looks like if you connect it to Claude Code. If you have the /MCP command, it'll list what's been connected. And rather than API endpoints, or rather than CLI arguments, MCP is actually tool calling under the hood. So it's kind of similar, it forms a similar kind of access pattern, but it has the benefit of actually exposing context to the agent. So the C in MCP, the context protocol, that's really what it's all about. It's giving the agent information about your project, about your tools, about your, really anything about your service. It can inject that into the context so it can make decisions. So if you ever read like a man page for like a CLI, -- help or something like that, it's kind of like giving the agent all of that information right out of the gate. And this actually gets injected into the actual Claude experience. So this is an example of Claude Opus. And you can see actually down here, it's kind of gray in the middle, it's actually adding the context from the MCP server into the chat experience. And so this gets sort of like embedded into the actual chat experience for something like Claude or Cursor. Building MCP servers is actually not that hard. This is fast MCP. I realized this as I was coming over that I had some Python in my slides, so please forgive me for that deep transgression. We actually love TypeScript at WorkOS. Everything is written in TypeScript. So, but this is a Python example, some archaic legacy programming language. And you can see here that you essentially define a function, right, which becomes a tool. You can have this decorator on top, this MCP tool decorator. And then you really just describe what it does in natural language in English. And then this is what gets exposed actually to the LLM to know how to call the tool. So in this example, it's like a feature that we have at WorkOS for feature flags. And we're telling the LLM actually how to format arguments or how to work with it. So this is pretty powerful, it's great. There was a recent blog post this summer or so with the title, "The S in MCP stands for security." And there have been a lot of security vulnerabilities in MCP, really because the protocol is so new, and the folks that have been working on it have just been trying to get the core functionality right. The core tool calling, the structure around it. If you think about early internet, before we had HTTPS, we had HTTP without the secure side. So MCP is kind of like that. So the second takeaway I have for you here is actually the hard part of deploying MCP is the security side. It's the stuff around authentication, audit logs, internal registries, like screening stuff for security, actually having it be sort of verified your MCP server isn't going to go off the rails. And that's a real thing that can happen. If you've ever heard the quote, "To err is human, but to screw up 10,000 times per second, you need a computer." MCP can do that. An agent can do that for you. And so it's actually very, very important to think about the security boundary, the security model around MCP. And it's a lot harder than just what I showed for that tool definition. So what matters for like MCP security or kind of MCP in the real world? Well, the first thing is auth and access management. So I'll talk about this just in a second, but MCP auth really is based around something called OAuth 2.1. If you've heard of OAuth 2, this is its younger, sportier brother, I guess. It's pretty different, actually. You can't just shim in exactly the previous world of OAuth. Second is like the discovery via registry. So actually in the workplace, you want people installing your MCP server, not just something kind of named like it, because they're giving credentials and security and potentially their sensitive data to it. And then the third thing is that kind of audit log and accountability. So when you actually have the MCP server doing something, what did it do? There's a lot of potential for MCP to be used by agents, like background agents. So even if you're not in the actual Claude session or ChatGPT session, you'll want to have a log around what's actually happening. So current state of the art of Auth and MCP, I will not stand up here and read you the full spec of how it works, but there's a couple things here that are worth calling out, and it's really these sections. So what it's describing here is using the OAuth dynamic client registration. So this is what I was talking about in OAuth 2.1, how it's like a bit different. And this has been fully ratified in the MCP spec. If you're building a client, it must authenticate this way, which in the IETF language is like the hardcore thing you actually have to build. So this is the way that MCP servers actually connect. The dynamic client registration essentially means that an MCP server can be anonymous. It's a great feature. It's really never been implemented by other systems until this moment. So even though it's a standard, it's been in the standard for like almost 10 years. There's very, very little sort of example code around it or open source packages. Quick ad for WorkOS, if you need to do this, we can help you with it. But this actual authentication system is pretty complex. Really the current state of the art here, this dynamic client registration, if you can combine it with other forms of auth through OIDC, you can actually get like enterprise-focused auth, like SSO, like SAML, like companies actually want. Still today, unfortunately, something like 65% of MCP servers, just like in the directories out there, do not actually even support OAuth. They do it through API keys, which is very clunky if you've ever had to run like an npx package locally to kind of act as an MCP bridge. That's what's happening there. It's a really terrible user experience for like mere mortals trying to build on top of it. And then stuff through like machine-to-machine or client credentials flow is the third one. But OAuth is really the one that they've ratified around that users are expecting. Second, I mentioned the registry. So there's actually now an official MCP registry. You kind of just get your thing listed there. After it's listed, it's like unclear how clients will discover it. It's unclear how they'll be trusted. This is like quite bleeding edge. This is just a couple months ago, I believe. But there is a registry that you can actually submit your stuff to and have some discoverability around it. This is going to evolve and change, I think, quite a bit over the next few months. And then the third thing I mentioned was accountability, right? The logging aspect of it. So having an audit log, not the most exciting thing in the world, probably not the thing you get out of bed to build, but having an actually activity log of what happened. In many customer environments, they're required by law to have this doing things. And then you, of course, want to scope down the privileges, the access control. You want to have the least privileges possible for the agent. You just don't want to give it, run of the mill for everything. Cool. So that's the second takeaway. So third takeaway here is really like a meta takeaway. It's like a few lessons in building MCP servers. So what I've actually seen in the wild, like some do's and don'ts. Okay, so first, use security best practices. Do the actual thing with OAuth 2.1, or use a service like ours or another to actually layer in that OAuth as the shim. Do not do it with API keys. Your adoption will actually be like kind of terrible if you're requiring someone to go copy keys and paste it in a local running shell session or something like that. So do it with the actual open standard OAuth keys. Don't create a tool for every API endpoint. This is not building an API. Tools are not API endpoints. That is the very first thing people often end up doing. You'll find a lot of stuff online where it'll take your opening API spec and spit out an MCP server, and that MCP server will be trash. It won't work, and the performance will be terrible. You actually have to think about composition around specific actions, not just API endpoints. The LLMs behave in a different way. They're like task-oriented versus resource-oriented. So if there's like one thing I would actually suggest you take away in terms of thinking about building MCP, this is it. You could give an entire talk on this. So really think about specific activities or specific tasks that people are going to be doing. So that's a don't. You want to document your MCP server both for humans and also agents. The LLMs actually need this context. They need clear error messages as well, just like a person. And you can give them quite a bit of context to be able to resolve issues. Something like the Supabase MCP server or like the Vercel MCP server, it actually can go get the logs. So it can like push code, it can crash, it can get the logs, it can self-heal. So the more context you can pull back and give information about how to use it, or if there's errors, the better. And then last, if you're within a company, don't really let every single person, every workload connect to every MCP server without checking. There can be a bit of a, people that are tinkerers just want to try everything. Like, have you ever seen people that wear like fitness trackers and they got like 10 of them all over their body? It's kind of like that with MCP servers. What actually happens is as you accumulate these, it bloats your context. And if you say, oh, it's only a third of my context, I have 2/3 left, there's a bunch of research that shows as the context gets increased, the actual MCP, attention is spread thinner, performance declines around tool calling, and actually the LLM be able to reason. So you want it to be like lean. As few tools as possible, as few MCP servers, just as what's needed. Sometimes it's easier to forget that you've actually installed them. With something like Cursor, you'll throw it in, forget about it, and then be like, why is this new Claude model just trash? Well, it's actually your MCP server doing it. Okay, so those are 3 takeaways for MCP, how to build Auth with MCP. Talking a mile a minute, but I have 3.5 minutes left, so one of my favorite things to do when giving talks is live demos. So what do you think? You want a live demo? Okay. That was a lackluster applause. Okay. There we go. Okay. The demo gods demand it. You have to sacrifice to them. So this is ChatGPT, right? And the only thing I probably love more than MCP is free stuff. And so we built something at WorkOS called MCP.shop. And MCP.shop is the only swag store in the world where you can get not just our bootleg MCP merch, but you have to order it through MCP. It's the only way. So if you go down here to MCP.shop, you'll see this order on MCP. And we have this new button that says order with ChatGPT apps. Who's heard of ChatGPT apps? Yeah, there we go. Wow, they were announced like a month ago or less. So if you go here, you'll check it out. There's some instructions here. I'll copy this really quick. This is our MCP endpoint. I'm gonna go back to ChatGPT. And this is always tricky. So what I'm gonna do here is go to apps and connectors and go all the way to the bottom, and I have to turn on developer mode, full hacker mode. And then from here, now I can add the MCP server. Eventually, if it's in the store, if it's in their directory, you won't have to do this. So I'll call this MCP shop, give it the server URL here, which is just mcp.shop/MCP. It's authenticating through OAuth, right? And I'll say yes, danger mode. Okay. So what it's doing back here behind the scenes is actually ChatGPT is doing that dynamic client registration with our identity system at WorkOS. WorkOS Auth Kit is what we call it. And boom, what you'll see is it just pops up here. So I'm actually already signed into the MCP shop, so it's opening up this browser window and saying, hey, do you actually want to connect to ChatGPT? Do you want to do that or not? So this is actually the OAuth registration that I was talking about before, right? So I look at this and I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And fingers crossed, it'll work. The OpenAI stuff, sometimes it doesn't work. Okay, MCP shop is now connected, great. So now if I go back to ChatGPT, it should show up here as, yeah, so you can see it's actually added as one of these connectors. Like, pretty cool. So I can say here and be like, yo, what shirts do you have? So it's looking for the tools. There's actually 2 tools it has available. What? Come on. Yeah, show me the shirts. Yes, show me. GPT-5, man, I don't know. It's like, it's kind of testy sometimes. All right, so here. So it went back. It called a tool that actually, I think I maybe can expand this. Yeah. Oh, no. Let's try it again. That's what I'm talking about. So under the scene is actually calling a tool to go get the information from from our MCP server about what's available here. This is what I was trying to. So it's calling the tool show store content with no arguments. So I'm going to confirm that it's going to run, and boom, this is our really cool run MCP server. I'm like, okay, that looks great. I want to order one. Oh, it's actually already prompted me that. So if I say like, the name is Michael. Email, address, 555. And I'll say phone. And size, I want X. How about XXL? People like the baggy stuff now, right? It's like, yeah, this is what I mean. Come on. So this is actually calling a separate tool that's actually doing the ordering. And we have even more stuff that's pretty cool inside of this. If you're an admin, it will actually tell you like what shirts are available, or what inventory is there, what's been ordered, what hasn't been there. Great, okay, so it's gonna keep asking me stuff, but if you wanna go do this, you can add it to your actual ChatGPT right now, and you can all get free t-shirts. So that's my talk, thanks so much.